The smell hit Clearwater County before the trucks did. It came in on the wind sometime around 4 in the morning, thick and dark and sweet in a way that didn't belong to anything anyone could name right away. Farmers stepped out onto their porches in the gray before sunrise, coffee in hand, and sniffed the air like dogs sensing rain. Some thought a feed mill had caught fire. Others figured a neighbor's silage had gone bad in an unusual way. By the time the sun cleared the tree line east of Boundary Road, the whole township smelled like the inside of a roastery. Nobody knew yet that it was coming from the Aldrich place. Warren Aldrich was 61 years old, built like a man who had spent 4 decades arguing with the land and losing often enough to stay humble. He stood 6 feet even, though he'd lost a 1/4 inch to age and hard winters. His hair was the color of old barn wood, gray going silver at the temples, still thick enough that he never wore a hat indoors. His hands were wide and scarred at the knuckles, and the skin around his eyes had been creased by too many squinting summers into something like a permanent question. He had a jaw that suggested stubbornness and eyes, pale gray, almost colorless in flat light, that suggested something quieter than stubbornness. Patience, maybe, or the particular kind of tired that only comes from outlasting things. He had farmed the same 280 acres his grandfather had broken from bush outside of Whitmore, Saskatchewan, 40 years before Warren was born. The land sat on a wide, shallow ridge above the Clearwater River Valley, which sounded prettier than it was. The river was low most years, and the ridge caught the wind in all 4 directions. Good land once, when the rains came properly. Less good in recent years, when they didn't. Warren's wife, Sandra, had passed 4 years earlier from a cancer that moved fast and gave them only 1 summer of knowing. After she died, Warren stayed. People expected him to sell. His daughter called from Calgary twice a month with suggestions about retirement properties near Airdrie. His brother, Terrence, drove out from Saskatoon one September and walked the fields with him and said, carefully, that maybe it was time. Warren listened to all of them and said very little, which was how he handled most things. He kept farming. Not well in those years, but he kept. The spring that the trucks came, Warren was in his 4th consecutive year of below-average yield. The topsoil on the south quarter had thinned to something close to heartbreak. Pale and powdery at the surface, hard-packed 3 inches down, shedding moisture instead of holding it. He'd tried cover crops. He'd tried reducing tillage. He'd borrowed money for an irrigation upgrade that helped some but not enough. The land was tired in a way that Warren recognized because he felt it in himself. He had $2,200 in his operating account and a loan payment due in 6 weeks. The first truck came on a Tuesday. Warren was replacing boards on the east fence line when he heard the diesel coming up Boundary Road. Not just one engine, but several, spread out, not the sound of farm equipment, but of something heavier. He straightened up and watched. 3 transport trucks turned off the highway, slowed at his gate, and idled there. The lead driver climbed down. He was a younger man, maybe 35, in a yellow safety vest with a company name on it. Warren didn't recognize. He had a tablet in his hand and a clipboard under his arm, and the look of someone who had made this kind of stop before. "You Aldrich?" he called across the ditch. "That's right," Warren said. The driver checked his tablet. "We've got a delivery scheduled. Organic processing byproduct. You agreed to receive." Warren had, in fact, agreed to receive it. 3 weeks earlier, a woman from an agricultural cooperative had called him about a pilot program. A large food processing facility 2 hours south, a commercial coffee roasting and packaging operation that supplied grocery chains across Western Canada, was producing spent coffee grounds in volumes they couldn't manage. The provincial composting sites were full. Landfill costs were climbing. They were looking for farmland that could accept the material as a soil amendment, free of charge, with a small per-acre stipend attached. The woman had sent him the agronomist's report. Warren had read it twice, looked at his south quarter, and called her back. The stipend was enough to cover his loan payment. Go ahead, Warren told the driver. The trucks backed in through the gate he opened for them and began to unload on the south field. The material came out dark and dense, steaming faintly in the cool morning air. By the time the third truck finished, there was a long windrow of spent grounds running 200 meters across the field, black as winter earth, and the smell, that thick, roasted, slightly earthy smell, had begun to rise and move. By noon, it had reached the Faber place to the north. Leonard Faber was 67, short and barrel-chested, with a red face and white hair he kept cropped close. He had farmed the land adjoining Warren's for 30 years, and for most of those 30 years he had considered himself the more successful farmer of the two, which was true in some years and less true in others. He drove his truck to Warren's yard that afternoon and did not get out of it. He rolled down the window instead. "What in the hell is that smell?" Leonard said. "Coffee grounds," Warren said. "Soil amendment." Leonard stared at him. "Beg your pardon?" Warren explained. Leonard listened with the expression of a man hearing something in a foreign language that he wasn't certain was complimentary. "You're letting them dump their garbage on your fields," Leonard said when Warren finished. "I'm accepting an organic amendment with documented nitrogen content," Warren said. "That's what I said." Leonard drove home. That evening, Warren could see the light on in Leonard's kitchen for a long time. Within 3 days, most of Clearwater County had heard about it. The reactions were varied, and none of them were quiet. At the co-op in Whitmore, men Warren had known his whole life stood with their coffees and talked about it in the way that rural men talk about things that worry them, which is to say they talked about it sideways. They said things like, "Well, I heard he's taking in commercial waste now," with a particular tone that made commercial waste sound like a moral failing. Someone mentioned that the smell was probably a violation of something, though nobody was certain of what. Someone else said they'd read online that coffee grounds made the soil too acidic, and this was with the confidence of a fact. Warren's neighbor to the west, a woman named Glennis Rourke, knocked on his door one evening. She was 73, white-haired and precise, with the manner of a woman who had once been a school principal and had never entirely stopped. She stood on his step and said, very politely, that she was concerned about the smell affecting her granddaughter who visited on weekends and had sensitivities. Warren said he was sorry for the inconvenience and that the smell would dissipate as the material was worked into the soil. "And when will that be?" Glennis asked. "Few weeks," Warren said. She looked past him at the dark field visible through the kitchen window. "And you believe this is going to help?" "I do," he said. She nodded once, the way she might acknowledge an answer that was technically responsive to the question without being satisfying, and drove home. His daughter, Rebecca, called that Sunday. She was 42, sharp and caring in equal measure, and she had inherited her mother's way of expressing concern as a series of calm questions. "Dad, I'm hearing things. From who?" "From Aunt Lorraine." "From the Faber boy." "From a Facebook group, apparently, about Clearwater County." "There's a Facebook group about Clearwater County," Warren said. "There are Facebook groups about everything, Dad. What are you doing out there?" he told her. She was quiet for longer than usual. "And the agronomist's report says this actually works." "It does. Then why is everyone upset?" "Because it smells," Warren said, "and people don't like things they haven't seen before." She was quiet again. "Then, are you okay out there?" "I'm all right," he said. "You don't have to stay, you know. You don't owe that land anything." Warren looked out the window at the south field, dark in the evening light. "I know," he said. He didn't say what he was actually thinking, which was that the land didn't owe him anything either, and that they were even, and that being even with a piece of earth you'd worked for 40 years was as close to belonging somewhere as he knew how to feel. More trucks came that week. The cooperative had arranged 3 separate loads, spread across 10 days. Warren worked each delivery into the soil with his disc harrow as soon as the trucks left, turning the dark material into the pale topsoil, watching the ground change color beneath the equipment. It was strange and slow work. The south field began to look different, darker, richer, in a way that Warren noticed but couldn't yet prove meant anything. Leonard came by again on the fourth day, this time getting out of his truck. He stood at the edge of the worked field and looked at it for a long time without speaking. "Smells less now," he finally said. "Worked it in," Warren said. Leonard crouched down and picked up a handful of the turned earth. He squeezed it, felt the texture, let it fall. He didn't say anything else about it. He got back in his truck and left. Warren understood this as a small concession. May came in warm and the planting went well. Warren seeded his south quarter with a winter wheat variety he'd had good results with before. The seed went into soil that felt different under the equipment. Not dramatically, not in some way he could have put into a sentence, without sounding hopeful in a way he distrusted, but different. The soil held moisture differently. The crust that usually formed within days of seeding was slower to appear. He did not tell anyone this. He noted it in the small spiral notebook he kept on the kitchen table. June was dry, July was drier. By the third week of July, the Clearwater River was lower than Warren had seen it in 15 years. The wheat on Leonard's north field had begun to show stress. The leaves curling in the early afternoon, the color shifting from the deep green of healthy grain towards something yellower and more desperate. The Rourke field to the west was worse. Warren could see it from his ridge, the pale, struggling geometry of crops in ground that had given up on holding water. He walked his south field on a morning in late July, before the heat settled in. He walked the rows slowly, the way a man walks when he is looking closely at something and does not want to miss anything. The wheat was standing well. The leaves were not curling. He knelt at one point and pushed his hand into the soil between the rows and felt moisture at 2 inches depth, 3 inches, 4. He held his palm flat against the earth, the way his grandfather had showed him when he was a boy, feeling for what the land was holding. It was holding something. He did not smile, because that was not his way, but he stayed kneeling in the dirt for a long moment before he stood up and walked back to the yard. Leonard noticed first. Or maybe he didn't want to notice, and the noticing was forced on him by what he could see from his own fence line. He drove over on a Wednesday afternoon in early August, when the heat was sitting hard on the county, and most of the wheat in the township was already in trouble. Leonard was a man who did not make small talk easily, and he wasted none of it that day. "Your south field," he said, standing at the edge of Warren's yard. "What about it?" Warren said. "It's green. Mostly," Warren agreed. Leonard was quiet. He had his hat in his hands, which he didn't usually do. He was a man who wore his hat like a second skin, and seeing him hold it was like seeing him uncomfortable in a way that he was working to manage. "How's your moisture?" Leonard asked. "Better than I expected," Warren said. "Down at 2-3 inches? Down at 4. Leonard put his hat back on. He looked at the south field again, at the standing wheat, the color that didn't belong to a dry year. He worked his jaw around something he didn't say. "I was hard on you," he said finally. "About the smell, you weren't the only one," Warren said. "No," Leonard said, "but I was." Warren didn't say it was fine, because that would have been the easy thing to say, and Leonard wasn't asking for easy. He nodded instead. Leonard nodded back. They stood there together at the edge of the yard and looked at the field for a while, two men who understood that some things didn't need much more than that. The agronomist came in mid-August. Her name was Priya Sandhu. She was 38, compact and precise in her movements, with dark hair pulled back efficiently, and the kind of focused attention that made you feel, when she looked at you, that she was actually seeing you and not managing her time. She had been skeptical of the pilot program initially. She'd said as much to Warren on the phone in March, and she was honest enough to show up in August and see what the skepticism had missed. She walked the south field with Warren for 2 hours, taking samples at a dozen points, measuring, photographing, crouching to look at root structure where the wheat had been thinned for sampling. She didn't say much while she worked. When she was done, she stood at the edge of the field and wrote notes for a while. "Your moisture retention is significantly better than the county average for this season," she said. "I noticed," Warren said, "the microbial activity in the soil samples is higher than I'd expect for this soil type." She looked up. "The grounds introduced carbon and nitrogen, but there may also be a fungal network effect from the organic material. We'd need more time and more samples to confirm that." She paused. "You had a lucky outcome, maybe," Warren said. She looked at him. "You think it wasn't luck?" "I think the report I read in March said it might work," he said. "And I had nothing to lose by trying." Priya was quiet for a moment. "You had your reputation," she said. Warren considered this. "I've got a different opinion of my reputation than my neighbors do," he said. "Always have." She almost smiled. "I'm going to write this up. The cooperative will want a case study. Would you agree to participate?" "Sure," Warren said. The harvest came in late August. Warren combined his south quarter on a Tuesday, starting at first light. The yields came up on the monitor in the cab, field section by field section. And Warren watched the numbers accumulate with the quietness of a man who has been waiting for something for a long time and has learned not to let the waiting become wanting too loudly. The south field came in at 41 bushels per acre. The county average for that season, in a dry year that had taken the heart out of most crops in the region, was 26. Warren sat in the cab of the combine at the end of the last pass and turned the engine off and sat in the sudden silence. Outside, the stubble field stretched yellow-gray in the late August light. The sky above it was that particular Saskatchewan blue that only appears after the heat breaks, clear and hard and very far away. He thought about his grandfather, who had broken this ground with a team of horses and a one-bottom plow, and a stubbornness that his family called a character flaw until it became a legacy. He thought about Sandra, who had kept the books and kept the peace, and kept him grounded in all the ways the land couldn't. He thought about his daughter, who had asked you don't owe that land anything, and how the answer to that was more complicated than either of them had known how to say. He climbed down from the cab and walked to the edge of the field and stood there for a while with his boots in the stubble. He had owed the land a try, at least. He figured they were square now. Glennis Rourke stopped by that September, before the cold came. She brought a jar of the rhubarb jam she was known for in the community and handed it to Warren at the door without ceremony. She was the kind of woman who expressed things in practical gestures rather than sentences, and Warren was the kind of man who received them the same way. "I heard your yield numbers," she said. "Word gets around," Warren said. "It always does." She looked past him at the kitchen, at the farm visible through the window, at the field that had been dark with spent coffee grounds in April and was now harvested and quiet. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I wasn't very neighborly. You had concerns," Warren said. "I had opinions," she said, with a precision that suggested she was aware of the difference. "That's not the same thing." Warren put the kettle on. She stayed for an hour. They talked about the season, about the cooperative's plans to expand the pilot program to 4 more farms in the region, about her granddaughter, who was, in fact, not particularly sensitive to smells, and had merely said so because Glennis had put the idea in her head. "I was looking for reasons," Glennis said. "Most people are," Warren said, "when they've already decided." She nodded slowly. "And how did you decide to say yes to those trucks?" Warren thought about it. He thought about the agronomist's report, about the thin, pale topsoil on the south quarter, about the loan payment and the operating account balance, and the particular texture of desperation that is not panic, but is adjacent to it. He thought about his grandfather and about Sandra, and about the way the land had looked in March, tired and dry and past asking for much. "The land needed something I couldn't give it," he said, "and someone offered something I didn't expect. Seemed worth trying." Glennis looked at her tea. "That's very calm for a gamble." "It wasn't really a gamble," Warren said. "The worst case was the same as what I already had." She left the rhubarb jam. Warren kept the jar on the kitchen windowsill, where he could see it from the table, where he did his bookkeeping in the evenings. It was a small, ordinary jar, nothing particular about it. But it stayed on the sill through the winter, and sometimes in the gray months when the fields were under snow, and the land was holding its breath between one season and the next. Warren looked at it and thought about neighbors and seasons, and the particular kind of pride that prevents people from seeing what's right in front of them. He wasn't proud of much, but he was proud of this. He had looked at a field that was dying and refused to stop asking what it needed. The following spring, 4 more farms in Clearwater County signed on to the cooperatives program. Leonard Faber was one of them. Warren found out when Leonard pulled into his yard one April morning with a question about how much material per acre and how deep to work it in. He had his hat on the way he usually did, and his expression had the particular quality of a man who had arrived at a decision and was past embarrassing himself about it. Warren told him everything he knew, which wasn't much, which was the honest answer. They stood at the edge of the south field. The field that last October had been stubble and was now greening again, the winter wheat pushing through the surface in the slow, determined way of things that have found what they needed. And Leonard asked careful, practical questions, and Warren answered them as best he could. Before Leonard left, he said, "You always were stubborn." "Yes," Warren said. "That's not a criticism," Leonard said. The trucks would come again in 2 weeks. Warren could already smell, faintly on the south wind, the ghost of what was coming, that dark, roasted sweetness that had scandalized the county once, and would not this time surprise anyone. He stood at the edge of the field for a while after Leonard drove away, his hands in his jacket pockets, the April wind moving across the ridge, the way it always did and always would. The soil beneath his boots was dark and alive. He had given it something it couldn't make alone. It had given him back a year, maybe more. That seemed like a fair trade.